Hello, everyone. First, I want to say thank you to the Startup Day team. Let's give them a big round of applause. They are absolutely amazing, behind the scenes doing so much work. So thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I am excited. This is my second time on the stage here at Startup Day. I did it in 2020. Let's hope a pandemic doesn't follow this one, okay? With that being said, Jay Johnson and I focus on behavior. And one of the key aspects is what if we could predict all of our failures? How many of you have failed? A show of hands. Give me a big hand raise. Let's see. How many of you have failed at something? When you looked back on that and started to question, why did I fail? What went wrong? How did this go? What if we could predict those things in advance? How many of you have ever suffered from burnout? Show of hands. How many of you are burned out right now? All right. How many of you have engaged in conflict with your teams? How many of you have had an argument with somebody? How many of you have made a terrible decision and we're like, I really boned that one, right? So why do I focus on behavior? My background is in behavioral science. I study neuroscience, psychology, and let's see if this is gonna work. There we go. Neuroscience, psychology, and communication. Why? Because behavior is the root of all success and failure. You'll hear me say that a couple of times. Now, if you look at any of the data, and this presentation, here's my challenge. I've got to give you about 5 years of data in 25 minutes. Your challenge is going to be, how am I going to use this to ensure that I don't make the same mistakes? Because let's take a look at some of the research. Let's think about Forbes. Top 10 reasons startups fail. Top 10 reasons you don't get your pitch. Top 10 reasons. They're all the same. You look at Forbes, you look at Harvard, you look at Entrepreneur, you look at Gallup. It's all the same. And I'm gonna give you a key to understanding the behaviors that are going to drive your success. So that's our starting point. Behavior, the root of success and failure. I loved what Martin was just saying about culture. How many of you have the culture in your organizations that you truly love, that every single person is aligned in that vision, that mission, they're constantly working in the same direction? How many of you have that? How many of you, that looks like the farthest goalpost and you have no idea how to get there? Okay, let me give you a little secret. Macro culture is the result of micro behaviors. Every behavior you do as a leader, yes, you have to walk the talk. But also, you've got to get your managers, your tech people, you've got to get your entire team moving in the same behavioral direction. That is what creates culture. Sometimes culture looks like this crazy big thing that we can't do. It's your decision to behave every single day that affects that. And if you're not careful, your behavior will betray you. I'm gonna tell you a couple of stories about how it's done so for me. I have failed many of times. I've failed my teams, I've failed companies, but at the end of the day, this journey is a continuous journey. Behavior is a choice. This is important. How many of you have ever heard somebody say, well, that's just how I am? You heard somebody say that? Bullshit. That's how you're choosing to behave. I'm challenging you here today that you are choosing that pathway. And by making better choices, you will engage your teams, build your culture, and avoid these failures. How do we do that? Better choices come from awareness and practice. I'm happy to introduce you to the Behavioral Elements program, which is modeled off of the 4-Drive framework. So I'm gonna play a little interaction here. I want you to think of our ancient ancestors, right? Ancient ancestors. You're gonna have to yell it out to me. I know that's really tough with the Estonian crowd, so please bear with me and play along. What is something that our ancient ancestors had to do in order to survive on this planet? They had to hunt. They had to bring in resources. They had to get food. What happened if you were the best hunter? Yes, you had sex, you procreated, you continued your line, and more better hunters come along the way. Very good. What's something else they had to do? They had to stay alive. They had to learn to defend, right? A saber-toothed tiger. One of us is not going to be able to take out a saber-toothed tiger. But all of us here together could probably scare it off. Or if we were a tribe, we had to bond. We had to connect with each other. Now, Homo sapiens, our species, has been on this planet for 192,000 years. All of the tech, all of the new modern things, that's so new. Agriculture, very, very new. Huts, pretty new. Crazy. 180,000 years of biological evolution studied by Paul Lawrence and Nitin Noria, two doctors of management science from Harvard University. And they put together a comprehensive 4-drive framework that helps us to understand why we do what we do. We have the drive to acquire. This is our hunting and gathering. This is our ability to bring in resources. We have the drive to defend. We have to keep that saber-toothed tiger. We had to predict future weather patterns. We had to be able to plan for winter. We have the drive to learn. We have to understand fire, how to create it. We had to model new environments. All of these different things was a learning function and a learning capacity. And then last but not least, we had to learn to bond. Because if all of us were a tribe and this guy right here decided to eat all of our extra food that we'd been storing, what would we do with them? Wow, kill him. Wow, you went there. Yes, we would. Minimally, we'll be nice and we'll kick him out of our tribe. And alone, you have no chance of survival 180,000 years ago. So we had to learn to bond. We've mapped these to the behavioral elements. Each of us, every single person in here has all 4 of the elements, all 4 of these drives at play. How many of you have ever, give me a show of hands and I want some honesty here, okay? How many of you have ever walked into, say, like a little reception area and there's this beautiful, nice piece of cake sitting there and you're like, ooh, I want that. And then another part of your brain goes, but we just started our diet. I can't eat that. And then the other part of your brain was like, but, we did take the stairs this morning, so it's okay. And then the other part of your brain's like, but you promised, you made a resolution. No, you can't do that. And you start to argue. Now, I have a little Jack Russell Terrier dog. If I put that piece of cake in front of that dog, do you think he's gonna hesitate? Do you think he's gonna be like, no, that's gonna make my hips look bigger? No, absolutely not. That dog is gonna devour the cake. We as humans have cognitive dissonance. We're pulled this way, we're pulled that way, all at the same time. We can simultaneously want something and hate it. Pretty impressive. That's a complex machine is what our brain is. So by mapping these things, we can see the push and pull. We have all 4 of the drives, but some of them pull on us a little harder than others. Now, I'm gonna share with you what the assessment looks like. This is the behavioral elements assessment. And you'll see on the screen what we can do is measure each of these. This is one of the things that I found. It took me 3 years to design the methodology to map to Paul Lawrence and Nitin Noria's work. And it was a game changer personally. I didn't even actually have an intention of using this in any of my trainings. I was like, I've learned how I actually make decisions and why I'm such an asshole sometimes. Got it. All right, so when we look at this, we have a 0.4 line of harmony. If you were in perfect harmony and perfect balance, that's where you would land. 30,000 assessments, we've never seen anybody fully balanced, okay? Just to give you an idea. We also have the area of balance. This is where you're leaning into certain drives pretty effectively. You're able to do it. You're able to move in and out of these spaces. One doesn't necessarily pull too much harder than the other. You still feel the tension, but not necessarily pulling. This is the low, 0.25. No one has ever gotten a 0.25, just to give you a heads up. As we go up, we have strong preference, dominant preference, and at the final, the extreme preference. Now, you can see in this one, this is not a very balanced profile. I'll let you take a guess at whose profile this is. Oh, did I put my name on it? Yes, it is mine. So I am very high in the drive to acquire. My secondary element is drive to learn, the air element. I innovate and create new things in order to drive competition and win. That's how I make my decisions. And that works out sometimes. It works out really well. And sometimes it does not work out so well. For example, during COVID, I taught my 10-year-old nephew how to play chess. Do we have any chess players out there? All right. What happens when you take your hand off your piece when you move, your chess piece? You're stuck with it. Well, I was playing on my phone while I'm playing. Do you think I ever let my 10-year-old nephew win? Oh, hell no. You come at me hard, kid, or get off the stage. So, I'm playing chess with my nephew, playing on my phone. I move my queen. I take my fingers off my queen, and immediately I know. You ever had that moment where you're like, oops, you knew you made a mistake right then and there. And he looks at me, he looks at the board, I'm like trying to pretend like I'm not noticing. I'm looking at me and the board, and he moves and he wipes my queen off the table. My hands start to shake. I start sweating. I can feel my heart pounding in my chest. I can start to feel my airways tightening up. These thoughts in my brain say, stand up, bump the table, knock it over. Well, I'll start over, no big deal. You keep your record alive. That's the drive for competition. But does that create a great relationship with my poor 10-year-old nephew? Does that give him a good learning opportunity? No, of course not. So I activate my drive to bond, and I look across the table and I say, nice move, kiddo. You might have me here. Thank God he screwed up and I ended up winning anyways. But that's not the moral of the story. The moral of the story is behavior is a choice. We have the ability to choose. When we understand where these behaviors come from, we can more easily access them. Now, here's the interesting thing for you. I've taken a lot of time to work with entrepreneurs, startups, and so on and so forth, running them through the program. This is an average of more than 300 founders. And what we did was we mapped them all together to take a look at what were the primary behaviors across this large sample of founders. What can we learn from this? Look at how high that drive to learn and that drive to acquire are. Very similar to me. I'm more fire than I am air, and they go back and forth. But when we look at this starts to make a lot of sense for the things that Forbes, Gallup, Harvard all say are the common problems that startups face, all of the failures, why they face them. This helps to explain it. Notice that the earth element, the green one, very, very small. That's process, procedure, systems. That's uncertainty reduction, managing risk, quality. Now, when we think about this, let's take a look at three or four of basically what are said to be the top reasons entrepreneurs fail. Anybody want to guess what the first one is? I heard somebody say financial, money. Of course it is. Finance and management. Now, we do a lot of work with credit unions, banks, you name it. And guess what? Behaviors are patternistic. Any industry, doesn't matter which industry it is. When we find somebody who's very strong in the fire element, what do we see? That they're bold, they're more risky, they're goal-focused, they keep their eye on that prize and don't tell them no. They're gonna push forward anyways. When we see the air element, they're much more imaginative, creative, resourceful. We see the water, it's much more consensus-focused. They want the whole team to buy in. They want somebody else to help them make that decision towards finance or management. We see the earth being much more cautious, data-driven, very analytic, focused, and risk-averse. Which one are you? When we see the second, a big one here, attention and focus. How many of you have trouble staying on mission or staying on track because you've got 1,500 ideas? Welcome, I'm with you on that. Okay, so this is one of those huge game changers when we start to understand this program doesn't exist. The entire Behavioral Elements program does not exist if it was left up to me. That's why I'm a co-founder. Because I don't have a particularly strong earth profile. That's what ended up systematically getting this done. But thankfully, I built a team that had a strong earth profile. And actually, while I was here in Estonia speaking at Startup Day the last time, she took all of the ideas that I had and started building out the planner system that goes along with this. I didn't even have to ask. And I'll tell you, the tediousness of building a planner system absolutely bores the hell out of me. And it was done with style, grace, and excitement, because that was something that they were really passionate about. Do you know what your values are, your passions? Your drives will help you to determine what those are. When we're working inside of our drives, things are easier. Now, again, we have all 4 of the elements, but if you ask me to do a ton of earth tasks, I'm gonna burn out. I'm gonna be exhausted. I'm gonna not ever feel like I'm in flow. I'm never gonna find that space where it's just moving along. It's gonna be a trudge every single day. And that's not how we wanna be. When we lean into our strengths and then help outsource essentially some of our weaknesses, that can be huge. Marketing and sales, another big reasons why startups and entrepreneurs fail. Now, when we look at marketing and sales, fire elements are the first ones to get out there. You wanna buy this? You wanna buy this? Buy this? Buy this? No, no, no. They don't care if you say no. They're gonna ask enough people that eventually somebody's gonna say yes. But they also are many times high stakes. They're not pulling back to understand, who am I trying to pitch to or who am I trying to talk to? They haven't created an actual behavior buyer persona. Who is my customer? You may look at demographics, and that's fantastic, but are you looking at behavioral drives? Let me give you an example of this, and I'll go back to finance. There's this large, prominent bank in the United States, and no, it's not Silicon Valley Bank, but it's another one that we had worked with, and ultimately, they were doing a special. If you sign up for this loan, we will give you $500. And if you've ever seen any kind of special like that, well, that's great. If you're trying to attract somebody that has a strong drive to acquire, but then they're also gonna go, I don't know, I don't feel like doing it. However, when we flipped the script and changed the message and said, because what we did was we analyzed we researched essentially their client base. We found that most of their client base was actually more water, more driven to bond. So what do? We changed the narrative. We changed a simple message. If you sign up for this, we'll give your friend $500. Same cost, 32% increase in the number of signups. 32% increase. Could you do better with 32% more sales? When we start to think about how we make decisions, buying decisions, they're emotional. They're not rational, they're not logical. People buy because they need to fulfill needs, the need to acquire, the need to bond. How many of you have bought presents for somebody, gifts, maybe paid for a dinner? Hello, that's the drive to bond. How many of you are here to learn? Hello, you are paying for the experience of knowledge. The drive to defend. How many of you have put your money into an investment or paid for security services? All of those different things. When we understand this, we can change our behaviors and the behaviors of the people buying our products. Now, how do we survive and thrive? A couple of key aspects here, and I'm gonna talk to you about it. Again, I'm holding true to my time, and I'm gonna stick this landing. So, first of all, know your drives. Awareness will help you find balance and flow. What does that mean? How many of you have ever had one of those days? You know which day it is. It's that day that nothing is working, nothing feels right. Everything is taking twice as long, 3 times as hard, and you feel like you're just getting buried constantly. If you've had one of those days, I'm gonna encourage you to check your drive. Are you doing something that is actually in line with your strongest biological drives? And most oftentimes, the answer to that is no. I noticed that during the pandemic, I started to get really burned out. I started to have some kind of reaction. I love what I do. I love training, speaking. I love consulting companies. I love working with people. And I was burning out because I wasn't doing trainings because we were all stuck in the house and I thought I was gonna die. It was terrible. So I had to rethink, okay, what do I do? Well, I lined up a whole bunch of stuffed animals and kids' toys and started to give a presentation. And immediately, I know it sounds crazy, right? Well, most startups and co-founders are. So what happens? My adrenaline started to peak. I started to feel that sensation, and it wasn't even in front of a live audience. Thankfully, we got to that place of virtual presentations, and all of a sudden, the game was changed again, and I felt like work wasn't work anymore. Know your drives. That awareness will help you find balance, and it'll also help you find your flow. Second, engage your strengths, outsource your weaknesses. I could sit there, and you know what? I could put the planner system together. It would take me a decade, maybe, and it probably still wouldn't be particularly good because of the details. I would forget page 8. That's how my brain works. Well, when I think about that, that's not gonna keep me in balance. That's not gonna keep me in flow. Your energy, these drives have a huge impact on your energy, your focus, your attention. One of the main issues identified as why startups fail. So lean into your strengths. My team puts me into a room, says, hey, go create a new training. I'm like, okay, that's fun. That's what I like to do. Hey, go do this. Go speak at this place. Yes. Go write this report. I'll tell you one of my big failures. It's a continuous failure. I'm still not there yet. 10 years ago, I said, I'm gonna write a book. How many pages do you think I'm into that book? Okay, so if this would have been 6 months ago, the answer would have been a big fat 0. I started so many times and then deleted it. Started, deleted it. Wrote like 3 sentences, deleted it. Just kicked it out. Fail, 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 fail. 6 months ago, I hired a coach. I'm at page 78. Incredible, oh my gosh. Why? No, not for me, for her. Incredible that she got my ass to actually do work, but thank you, I appreciate that. Outsource your weaknesses. If you say, I can't afford it, you can't afford not to. Because there's an opportunity cost that is far greater than your financial investment. I didn't think I could afford a good CPA when I started my business. Oops. 2 years digging myself out of stupid money because I'm impulsive and I spend like a fire element. Third, adapt your message. Follow the platinum rule of communication. It's not about how you want to communicate. When you're creating your pitch, you need to be thinking about how that other person communicates. By the way, we've got pretty good data on investors too, interestingly enough. Very similar to, quite frankly, the founders. Shocker, because a lot of them are founders. Now, when we think about that, how am I pitching? What am I doing? Well, they've gotten smart. They've had some time in the trade, and they now know that they're gonna make sure that you have the details, because I'll tell you, when I invest, I make sure they have the details, because I'm not gonna be able to help them with that. So we need to think about how are they perceiving our message. And then last but not least, build a behavioral culture. Culture, as I mentioned before, is the sum of all of your behaviors. Set behavioral expectations. If your team is in conflict, the reason is because your behavioral expectations are not clear. If your team is struggling to make decisions, that's because you have not explored the behavioral aspect of decision making, which really stems from our drives. So in conclusion, the drives influence the key elements of a startup success and their failure. You, by learning your drives, can understand motivation, teamwork, decision-making, focus. We use this at organizations like Ford, Nikon, NASA. Why? Because they understand that there's a people element to any business, whether you're in tech, whether you're in trade, whether you're in sales, retail, it doesn't matter. The only constant across everything is people. So I'm gonna give you an opportunity to go further. First of all, this right here, if you do this and use that code, You can get the full report, which is usually $75. You'll get it for $25 because I love entrepreneurs and startups. I'm gonna offer you a free version, which is the 3-page report too. So I'm not trying to sell, but I wanna give you this opportunity to do this. The free version, it'll tell you what your primary element is. This version will tell you the scales, your choice of what you would prefer to do. I see some cameras, I'll give it a half a second. And by the way, I just stuck the landing. Time's up. Here's this, and you can also connect with me on LinkedIn by utilizing this one. So if you want to connect with me, if you want to further the conversations, this is my passion. I love this. I'd be happy to connect with you. Thank you so much for having me again, Startup Day. Appreciate it.
Jay, thank you very much. Love a good spirited discussion, so thank you for bringing that energy up here. So you answered, just at the end, you answered one of the most popular questions, which was identifying your drive and how to get this out. So you've got some information that the people can view to sort of start to kick them off. Which one of those am I? Mm-hmm. Would you say, in your experience, do drives tend to match up with industry? Do you think like one industry find that? Talk a little bit about that.
Brilliant question, yeah. So healthcare industry, number one, water. If you think about nurses, frontline nurses, 72% of nurses in the healthcare industry end up showing water. Sales, real estate agents, somewhere in the range of about 68% of all Keller Williams real estate agents that we've done ultimately ends up showing in the fire element.
Sales.
Yeah, if we look at engineering, Nikon or NASA or any of the groups like that, we often see a strong earth and a strong air, innovative and also systems thinking and process focused. So yes, it matches really, really well.
Okay. One final quick one there. You said, right, if you outsource, and if you can't afford it, well then it's not, like, okay, an accountant makes sense, right? I get that one too. Don't fuck around, get an accountant. But writing a report, I also couldn't sit down and focus to save my life. But like, I could never do the account, so it's clear. But write a report, I could probably do it. How do you sort of, especially in the early days, at some stage, you're gonna have to just push yourself.
I get it.
And I gotta do that. That's tough.
No, it is. And I started with $500. That was how I started my company about 14, 15 years ago. $500. I could afford business cards and a URL. Couldn't even get a website up. And it was one of those things where if I was to go back and talk to myself, I would have said, hey, really focus on what matters. Because the things that I started purchasing next, for example, some of the tech that I purchased, some of the different pieces that I purchased, if I looked back on that and really went through it, I bought those because of the drive to acquire and the drive to learn. I didn't think about long-term investment. I didn't think about this. So choose carefully. Obviously, we don't all have a ton of money when you're kicking off. So choose carefully, but really try to outsource some of those pieces.
It's interesting. You can probably afford it if you really, really take a deep look at what you're spending money on.
Priorities, absolutely.
I love it. Jay, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.